Whether you have a torn boot or a bad joint, we're going to show you how to replace your CV axle on your KRX 1000. Now there's a couple of unique steps to these machines, so you're going to want to stick around and pay attention to that. And once we have that axle out, if you plan on replacing the boots, we have a separate video for that, so make sure you check it out. But with that being said, it's going to be a similar process for your 2 and your 4-seaters, so let's go ahead and get started. To get this job done, you're going to need 14, 17, 19, and 36 millimeter sockets, along with your favorite lug nut socket. Then other than that, we're using a 1/2-inch breaker bar, torque wrench, some ratchets, 17 millimeter combo wrench. We've got a number 3 screwdriver along with an impact driver, safety glasses, flat blade screwdriver, needle nose pliers, dikes, a bungee cord, and a dead blow hammer. Now in the front, you don't necessarily need a drain pan, but a little bit of oil can leak out, so we have this just in case. 2 optional tools are a 2-jaw puller and a pry bar. This can help make the job easier, but no matter what you do, you always want to refer to your model-specific service manual for more information, proper procedures, and specs. To do this job, you have a couple options. The easiest way is to replace the entire CV axle, but if you want to rebuild it, you can do that as well with some CV boots. And these parts are available on our website. We have OEM and aftermarket options on there, so click the link in the description below for that. Now, if you're using OEM axles, you're going to want to use the axle nut kits. So your driver's side, that's going to be reverse thread, and your passenger side, that's standard thread. Now, other than that, we're using some rubber gloves, some rags, we have waterproof grease, anti-seize, and we're using some high temp, medium strength thread lock. We're going to start out on the back of the machine on the driver's side. We've already raised our machine with our lift, but if you don't have one of these, just make sure when you jack your machine up, you want to use some jack stands to make sure that it's secure. Take your wheel off, and then, as I mentioned before, this is reverse thread. So what we need to do first is remove the cotter pin, and then we're going to use that 36 millimeter socket, and we're going to go righty-loosey on this side, and I'm going to have somebody holding the brake. If the brake isn't enough to hold everything still, you can use a pry bar just like that on the studs. So I'm going to remove that spacer, and then I'm going to thread this back on just a little bit, and I'll explain that in a later step. We're going to go ahead and remove our caliper. Next, we're going to use our number 3 screwdriver to remove the screw holding this bracket for the brake line. And this is where you can use that impact driver if this thing is in there really good. Now we can pull the caliper off. Now this is going to be pretty tight usually. You're barely going to have enough play in these cables to pull it out, but if you need to work these a little bit, that's what you're going to have to do. So the pad's cleared. Now we're just rocking this to the side like that. Now we're going to remove the mounting bolts on the ends of the back radius rods. Now, as you pull the bolts out, you can pull up on the knuckle. I'm also using a jack stand to hold the trailing arm in place. You don't have to do this, but it kind of helps. I'm also swinging the brake caliper out of the way. Now this hub is typically going to be stuck on the axle pretty good. So it's time for every mechanic's favorite part of the job. And there is a puller you can buy to pull this hub off, but what we're going to do is use our dead blow hammer. We're going to hit the end of the axle and pull out on the hub, and it should pop that off. So we need to go just a little bit further, so I'm taking the nut off. And we've got this washer on the back side of it. Then we're going to rotate this knuckle forward and remove the CV axle from it. There's a little clip on the end of the axle holding it into the transmission. So we need to pop this thing out. So what we're going to do is use this like a slide hammer. We're going to hold it all straight, and it should pop out. Just like that. You can see that's the clip I'm talking about. So our axle is actually in good condition, so I'm just going to put it back in. But if you need to replace yours, you want to make sure you have some anti-seize or that ARP lubricant all over these splines right here. You're also going to make sure, this area is clean around the seal, and then you want to make sure this clip is in good condition. And we're going to make sure that the open end of the clip is facing up as we go in. That's going to help make sure it doesn't catch on anything. Last thing I want to mention is if you're putting all new axle shafts on. If you're using OEM shafts, the left rear shaft is always identified by this green band. So that being said, let's go ahead and put this in place. And with that clip being the way that it is, we're gonna line up the splines and then we're gonna have to hit it forward to get it to pop into place. Then you wanna pull on it like that and just make sure it's securely in place. Now on the end of the CV axle, you wanna make sure that you have this area lubed where it goes into the bearings, these splines, and then these threads that Kawasaki recommends using the ARP assembly lube. But again, we're using anti-seize, and I'm just using anti-seize all the way across. But if you want to use grease on these other spots, that sounds good too. So once you look like Tin Man, you know you got enough on there. So I'm gonna wipe that off so I don't get it all over everything else. And then I'm gonna take the end of the CV axle, I'm gonna tip it just a little bit. We're gonna swing the spindle over. So that part should slide right into place. Now, when you put the hub on, again, it's gonna be a little bit tight. So we're gonna use that 36mm socket and the dead blow hammer to help drive it in place. Just make sure you don't forget that spacer right there. So we're on to these threads. So I'm actually gonna use this old nut and I'm gonna thread this on until it's fully seated, or until this hub is fully seated. Okay, so that's seated right there. I'm gonna take the nut off so I don't forget to put the new one on along with that spacer. I'm gonna set the caliper in place before it's too late. And then we're gonna install both radius rods. Next, we need to spread the brake pads on the caliper, and then we're gonna slide it onto the rotor. And then with that caliper in place, I'm gonna install the bolt through that lower radius rod. So spec on the radius rod bolts is 70.4 foot-pounds, and then spec on the caliper bolts is 33 foot-pounds. And these caliper bolts, we're using that high temp, medium strength thread lock. Then we'll reinstall the brake line retainer. From here, we can install the spacer, and you can apply that ARP assembly lube to these threads, and you want to go on the edge of this washer. But again, I'm choosing to go just with this anti-seize. We're just trying to make sure we get the correct torque on that nut so it doesn't come loose. We're going all the way to 162 foot-pounds. Now with that tightened, we'll install our new cotter pin. We're gonna wrap that around the axle. Then from here, you can install the wheel, but for us, we're moving up to the front axle. Now on the front, it's gonna be the same thing. We've got the cotter pin we're gonna remove, and we're on the driver's side still, so this is reverse thread. Once we have this nut removed, we're gonna go ahead and remove our caliper. Now I'm gonna remove the caliper out of the way and hang it with a bungee. Now on the lower ball joint, I'm gonna remove that cotter pin and the nut. Next, I'm gonna use a pry bar between the knuckle and the lower A-arm and hit the side of the A-arm with my dead blow mallet. With everything freed up, we're gonna remove this hub the same way we did on the back. We also need to remove this axle nut. Feel free to do it before you ever hook up the puller. This hub is being super stubborn, so like I mentioned before, you can get that Kawasaki puller, but I know how much you guys hate buying special tools, so we're just grabbing a 2-jaw puller and we're gonna use that to remove it the rest of the way. After that, we've got the washer, don't lose that. And then from here, we need to remove our lower shock mounting bolt. And we also have the sway bar nut. We need to pull that out and remove the link from the A-arm. And then from here, you should be able to swing this knuckle out of the way and pull the axle out of it. But you might have to hit it through if it's not coming easy. So right here, we have the axle freed up. And to pull it out, you obviously want it straight. So I'm gonna get a tie down on this A-arm and pull that up out of the way. Now before we pull the axle out, I did place the drain pan underneath just in case a little bit of fluid comes out of the gear case when we pull this out. But we're ready to pull or pop this out now. We're gonna do it the same way we did on the back. And we do have a little bit of fluid coming out, so good thing we had our drain pan. Now, if you're going to install a new axle, just make sure that you wipe off any dust or dirt away from this seal and take a look at the lip. Make sure it's not torn or damaged. And then on your CV axle, make sure that you have the gap on the clip towards the top so it doesn't catch on anything as you install it. So I'm going to go ahead and set the axle in place. I'm going to line up my splines, and then I'm going to slide it in place just like that. Make sure it's not coming out so we know that clip is all the way in. I'm going to wipe up any spilled fluid. Now with that fluid, if you did lose a little bit, you want to double check your level once everything's back together and make sure it's topped off all the way. Now I'm going to lube up the end of the axle and slide the axle back into the knuckle. We're going to lower this down and install the lower shock mounting bolt. That's going to be 70.4 foot-pounds. And then the link arm, that nut is going to be torqued to 30.6 foot-pounds. Now the lower ball joint to the A-arm, we're going to make sure there's no oil or grease on there. We've got the castle nut. We're going to torque that to 52 foot-pounds. And when you tighten that down, you want to make sure that those lines line up with the holes in that ball joint so you can put the cotter pin in. If not, you just tighten it until you see the first slots in the castle nut line up. And we'll bend those ends over. And now we can install the hub. And again, same way as the back. So I'm almost all the way sucked down right here, but I've got a little bit of play. So I'm gonna have these brakes help me out. Just gonna set the caliper in place. We're gonna bolt it up. Again, the bolts are gonna be torqued to 33 foot-pounds. We're using that medium strength, high temp Loctite on there. So now we can install our spacer right here. We're going to use that ARP assembly lube or substitute. We've got the new nut. And again, we're torquing that down to 162 foot-pounds. And same thing as on the back. We've got our cotter pin, and you're good to go. That's how you replace the CV axles on your KRX 1000. Now, if you need any parts for your machine, you can find those on our website or just click the link in the description below. Now, if you have any questions about the process, or maybe you want to see other videos for your KRX, let us know in the comments below. And if you want to see more helpful content like this, you're going to want to subscribe to our channel. I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Thanks for watching.